My name is Alina Hartley. My father was the only person who ever called me Nellie, and he called me that right up until the spring morning he looked at me across his kitchen table and asked, very politely, who I was. I'm 44 years old, and for 19 years I have done the same thing for a living. I find the lies people bury inside numbers. Embezzlers, crooked partners, men who keep 2 sets of books and 1 clean smile. I'm a forensic accountant. A ledger tells me more about a person than their face ever could. Because a face can practice, and a column of figures cannot. I spent 2 decades teaching myself to read the worst of strangers. And I still missed it in my own brother, sitting 4 feet away from me every holiday, until the numbers finally made me look. What my brother did with our parents' accounts while our father was dying, and what happened at the dinner where he slid a pen across the table and asked me to sign, taught me something I should have learned a long time before. The most expensive thieves don't break a window. They get invited in. They carve the turkey. They give the toast. And they count on you loving them too much to ever check their math. I checked. Welcome back to the channel. This is where we tell stories about family, betrayal, and the quiet strength it takes to protect the people who can no longer protect themselves. If you've ever been called cold, or difficult, or selfish, simply for refusing to look away from something everyone else wanted buried, then this story is for you. If it moves you, type the word ledger in the comments so I know you're the kind of person who looks twice. And subscribe, because the part of this story that surprised even me is still coming. Let me take you back to the beginning, to a hardware store, and a man who taught me to count. My father was Walter Hartley, and for 38 years he owned Hartley Hardware on Main Street in a small river town in southeastern Ohio. It was the kind of store where men came in for a single bolt and left 40 minutes later having talked through a divorce. Dad knew every customer's first name, their father's first name, and usually the exact screw they needed before they finished describing it. He was not a sentimental man on the surface, but behind the register, he kept a green cloth ledger. And every night after close, he sat on a stool and entered the day by hand, even after he bought the computer, even after the accountant told him he didn't have to. When I was 9, he lifted me onto the stool beside him and taught me to add a column 3 times, top to bottom, bottom to top, and then a third way to catch myself. A clean ledger is an honest one, Nellie, he'd say. Numbers don't care who you are or how much you smile. That's why they are the only thing in this world you can trust to tell you the truth. I believed him. I built an entire life on believing him. My older brother, Grant, never took to the stool. Grant took to the front of the room. He was 4 years older than me, and he was the kind of boy adults described as a natural. Captain of things, quarterback of things. The Hartley who would do big things, everyone said, while I was the Hartley who was good with the books. In our family, those were the assigned seats, and once a family hands out the seats, almost no one ever gets up. Grant left for the city at 18 and came back in better and better suits. He worked in commercial real estate, then in something he called a fund, then in consulting. And I noticed over the years that the more impressive the title got, the harder it became to say exactly what he did all day. He'd pull into our parents' driveway in a leased SUV that cost more than my first house, hug Mom until she laughed, hand Dad a bottle of bourbon too expensive to open, and own the room before he'd taken off his coat. I loved him. I want to be clear about that, because what comes later is easier to understand if you know it was built on top of love. The way the worst betrayals always are. Our mother is Frances. Everyone calls her Fran. She raised 2 kids on a hardware store income, kept that green ledger balanced at home the same way Dad did at the store, and never once in my life raised her voice in a way I can remember. She is 77 now. 3 years ago, she started misplacing words, then names, then the thread of where she was in a sentence. The doctors gave it the name we all dread. Early, they said, then moderate. Some mornings she is entirely herself, sharp and funny, and asking about my work. Some mornings she calls me by her sister's name, a sister who's been gone since 1991, when Dad got his own diagnosis, Parkinson's first and then the strokes. The family had a decision to make about who would step in, and the seats were already assigned. Grant lived 2 hours away and was always, as he put it, slammed. But Grant was good with banks and lawyers and big rooms. So Grant became the one with power of attorney, the one who would handle the money, the accounts, the paperwork. And I was good with my hands and my patience, so I became the one who handled the man. I moved into my parents' house. I gave up my apartment in the city and ran my forensic practice from Dad's old den, taking the cases I could do remotely so I could be there for the doctor's appointments, the bad nights, the slow erasing of 2 people I loved. For the last 2 years of my father's life, I was the one who buttoned his shirts, and the one who learned which songs still reached my mother on the days her own name didn't. I tell you this not to make myself a saint. I tell you this because of what my brother would later say about it at a dinner table in front of everyone. Here is the part where I should have looked and didn't. About 18 months before my father died, Dad asked me to help him get the affairs in order, as he put it. He was lucid that week, fully himself, and he sat me down in the den and told me what he wanted. He'd been careful with money his whole life in the way that only people who grew up without it ever are. The store building, sold years before, had given him a nest egg. The house was paid off, free and clear, had been since I was in high school, and there was one account he cared about more than all the rest, an account he'd built deliberately, that he called, only half joking, the bridge. This is the bridge that carries your mother across, Nellie, after I'm gone, he said. Memory care is dear. I priced it. I never want her in a place that smells like bleach and giving up. This account keeps her somewhere good for as long as she's got. You understand me. Whatever else happens to the money, your mother's bridge does not get touched. There was $312,000 in the bridge account. I remember the number because Dad made me read it back to him 3 times, top to bottom, the way he taught me. He'd already given Grant power of attorney by then, on the advice of a lawyer, and because Grant had insisted it made the banking simpler, and I, fool that I was, agreed. Grant handled the money. I handled the man, the seats. There was one small thing. Maybe 4 months after that conversation, I was helping Dad sort the mail, and I saw a bank statement for one of the smaller checking accounts. There was a withdrawal on it, $2,200, to something called Heartless Consulting. I remember a half-second of cold, the same cold I feel at work when a number sits wrong in a row. And then I did the thing I have watched 100 victims do across a conference table, the thing I have privately judged them for. I explained it away. Grant handled the money. Grant had a consulting company. It was probably a reimbursement, a fee, something Dad had agreed to. It wasn't my account. It wasn't my job. I let it go. Because he was my brother, and because looking felt like an accusation, and because I was tired in a way that 2 years of caregiving makes you tired, down in the marrow. I weighed a number against a relationship, and I let the number lose. People like my brother are counting on exactly that. They are counting on your love being heavier than your suspicion. For 18 months, mine was. My father died on a Tuesday in late winter, at home, in the bed we'd set up in the den so he could see the bird feeder. I was holding his hand. My mother was holding the other, and on one of her clear mornings, thank God, she knew exactly who he was and what was happening. And she sang to him, low, a song from before I was born. Grant arrived 4 hours later in a black coat and wept beautifully at the funeral and gave a eulogy that made 300 people cry, including me. I want to be honest about that too. He loved Dad. I don't think the grief was fake. I've come to believe my brother is fully capable of loving someone and robbing them at the same time, and that this is somehow the most frightening thing about him. Not that he's a monster, but that he isn't quite. After the funeral, Grant moved fast. He always moved fast, that was his gift, but this was faster. Within 2 weeks, he wanted to get the estate wrapped up quickly, for Mom's sake. He'd been named co-executor with me, another lawyer's suggestion, another thing I'd waved through. He sent me a thick folder of paperwork, the final accounting of the estate, everything tabbed and stickered where I should sign. It's all in order, he said on the phone. Dad kept good records, you know that. Let's not make this harder than it has to be. Just sign and we can move Mom's money into the new care arrangement and put this behind us. He used the word closure 4 times in one phone call. I've since learned to be afraid of that word in the mouth of a man holding a pen. And here is the thing he forgot. Here is the thing that, I think, never once occurred to him in all his planning. Because in our family, I was the one who was good with the books. A small, useful skill, like being handy, not a real power. He forgot what good with the books had become. He forgot that his little sister spent her days dismantling exactly the kind of paperwork he just mailed her. He forgot that I do not sign a number I have not tested. My father trained that into me on a stool when I was 9 years old. I did not sign. I sat down at the desk in the den, the same desk where my father told me about the bridge, and I opened the folder, and I started to read the way I read at work. Top to bottom, bottom to top, and then a third way to catch myself. It took me about 40 minutes to find the first thing that was wrong. It took me 3 days to understand that my brother had been quietly emptying our parents for almost 2 years, and it took me about a week after that to stop shaking long enough to do something about it. Let me tell you what I found, because the numbers are the whole story, and the numbers don't have opinions. The bridge account, my mother's bridge, $312,000 on the day my father explained it to me. On the day I opened the folder, it held $26,411. I sat with that for a long time. I'm a professional. I have sat across from people on the worst day of their financial lives and kept my face as still as a frozen pond. I could not keep my face still in that den. $26,000. My mother's memory care runs a little over $8,000 a month at the place we'd chosen, the good place, the one that doesn't smell like giving up. $26,000 is 3 months. After that, the math becomes Medicaid and a waiting list and a facility 2 towns over with a number instead of a name on the door. My father priced the bridge so that would never, ever happen to her. And it was gone, so I did what I do. I built the trail. Over 19 months, money had left my parents' accounts in 4 ways, and every one of them was a method I had testified about in a courtroom at some point in my career. First, the checks. 41 checks over 19 months, made out to G. Heartless Consulting LLC, an entity my brother had registered in Delaware the same month our father's first stroke took his signature hand. The memo lines said things like management fee and care coordination and estate services. They ranged from $1,800 to $9,000. Together, $96,000. Second, the agreement. Stapled into Grant's own tidy folder, the one he'd mailed me to sign, was a document titled Personal Care Agreement. It said our father had hired Grant at $4,500 a month to coordinate and supervise all aspects of caregiving. It was signed in my father's name and dated 14 months before he died. I knew 3 things about that signature within about 10 seconds of seeing it. I knew my father's Parkinson's tremor made his signature climb and break by then, and this one ran smooth as a schoolboy's. I knew the date on it was a full month after the stroke that took his ability to sign anything at all, a fact documented in a hospital chart I had personally filed. And I knew my father never, in 81 years, signed his middle initial. And this Walter had a confident, careful J right in the center. Grant was the one who coordinated and supervised the caregiving. I want you to sit with that. I changed the sheets. I drove the appointments. I learned my mother's songs, and my brother paid himself $4,500 a month from our dying father's account to do the job I was actually doing for free. On the strength of a signature my father could not physically have made. Third, the house. My parents' home, paid off since 1996, free and clear, the safest thing they owned. 11 months before Dad died, someone opened a home equity line of credit against it and drew $90,000. The application carried my father's forged signature and my mother's, witnessed and notarized by a notary whose name I recognized, because Grant had posted a photo golfing with him 2 summers before. My parents owed $90,000 on a house they'd spent their whole lives paying off, and they never knew. And fourth, the cash. In the final year, a steady drip of ATM and counter withdrawals, almost all of them between $9,200 and $9,800. Just under $10,000. I knew that number cold. $10,000 is the figure that triggers a federal reporting form when you move cash, and structuring withdrawals to stay just beneath it is itself a crime. And more to the point, it is not the behavior of a man borrowing from family in a pinch. It is the behavior of a man who knows exactly what he's doing and is trying not to be seen doing it. Around $60,000 walked out of those accounts in 10s and 20s and was never seen again. I added it 3 times, top to bottom, bottom to top, and a third way, $214,000 in transfers and checks and cash, plus a $90,000 debt strapped to a house that had been clean for 30 years. More than $300,000 of harm done to 2 people who could no longer count it themselves, by the son they trusted to count it for them. And I had almost signed it. He'd put my signature line right there on page 11. And if I'd been any other man's daughter, I'd have signed it, and it would have been over. And my mother would have ended up in the place that smells like bleach. And everyone, at every holiday for the rest of our lives, would have called my brother the good son who handled everything. If your chest is tight right now, I understand. Mine was tight for days. Before I tell you what I did with what I found, type the word ledger in the comments if you've ever ignored a small wrong number because checking it felt like betraying someone you loved. And if a part of you already knows where this has to go, subscribe and stay with me, because the worst thing I found wasn't in the bank records at all. It was stapled to page 9, and I almost missed it. I'll get to page 9. First, I had to be sure I was right, because the most dangerous thing a forensic accountant can do is fall in love with a conclusion. Emotion doesn't hold up. Numbers do. So before I let myself feel anything, I called the two people who could tell me I was wrong. The first was Howard Pell, the estate attorney, an old fox of a man who'd done my father's will and had no patience for nonsense. I drove the folder to his office and laid it out tab by tab. He put on his glasses, went quiet, and read for a long time. When he finished, he took the glasses off and rubbed the 2 red marks they left on his nose. "Alina," he said, "I've practiced probate in this county for 36 years. I have seen children fight over a dead parent's wristwatch like dogs. But this," he tapped the care agreement, "this is not a fight over a wristwatch. A power of attorney is not a gift. It is a duty. Your brother had a fiduciary obligation to act in your parents' interest, and these documents, if they're what they appear to be, are not mismanagement. Forgery is a felony. Drawing on that home equity line with a forged signature is a felony. And taking money like this from a vulnerable adult has its own name in Ohio law, financial exploitation. And it carries the kind of weight that does not go away when the family asks nicely. "I don't want it to be what it is," I said. "I know you don't," he said. "But what you want and what the ledger says are 2 different witnesses, and only one of them will be under oath." The second person I called was Dana Aucaffer. Dana and I came up together at the firm, both of us certified fraud examiners, and there is no one alive I trust more to tell me I'm wrong. She drove up from the city on a Saturday with her own laptop and a cold, careful eye, precisely because she had no love for my brother to get in the way. We sat at my father's kitchen table for 9 hours, and she rebuilt my entire analysis from the raw statements, refusing to look at my conclusions until she'd reached her own. At the end, she closed the laptop and said the thing I needed to hear and dreaded hearing. "Nell, you're not seeing things because you're grieving. You're seeing things because they're there. This is the cleanest case of elder financial exploitation I've worked, and it's the worst because usually the family doesn't have one of us in it. He picked the wrong household to do this in." She put her hand flat on the folder, the way you'd steady someone. "Now listen to me, because you're too close. You document everything. You touch nothing emotionally until the file is bulletproof. You do not call him to scream. You do not give him a single day's warning to move money or shred paper. You let the numbers do the talking, because numbers are the only witness in this whole sad business that can't be guilted into changing its story. You taught me that, actually." She almost smiled. "Your dad taught you that, and you taught me. So let's finish it for him. But I'm a daughter before I'm an examiner, and so I broke Dana's rule a little. I didn't scream, but I called my brother because some childish part of me needed to give him the chance to be the man I'd grown up loving. I needed to hear him explain it. I think I needed him to make it not true. He picked up cheerful. He was always cheerful. "Nellie, you get through that paperwork. I know it's a slog. Just sign where the stickers are and we'll be done." "Grant," I said, "I need to ask you about some withdrawals from the bridge account. and about a consulting company, and about a home equity loan on Mom and Dad's house. There was a silence on the line. 4 seconds. I've replayed those 4 seconds 100 times. In them, I think, my brother decided which brother to be. "Okay," he said, and the cheer was gone, replaced by something smoother and more rehearsed. "I was going to walk you through all this in person. There's nothing there that isn't completely explainable, Nell. Dad and I set up the consulting arrangement years ago. You weren't really in those conversations. You were busy with the hands-on stuff. The care coordination is real work. Do you have any idea how much I handled behind the scenes? The HELOC was a cash flow thing, totally standard. I was going to pay it back out of the estate. You're looking at this like an auditor instead of like family." "I am an auditor," I said, "and that's exactly your problem," he snapped. And there it was, just for a second, the real face under the smile, the one I'd never been allowed to see. "You sit in your little office finding reasons to distrust people. You did it for a living, and now you're doing it to your own brother while Dad's barely cold. You weren't the only one who sacrificed, Alina. You think changing sheets makes you a saint. Some of us carried the financial weight. Some of us did the hard, unglamorous work of managing real money, and you'll never appreciate it because you've never had to. The bridge account is down to $26,000, Grant. That was Mom's care. Dad priced it so she'd never have to leave the good place. You took her bridge. Don't be dramatic," he said. "Mom's fine. I'll make it right. Just don't turn this into one of your cases. You owe me the benefit of the doubt. I'm your brother." A pause, and then the line that told me everything. "And frankly, you owe this family some loyalty after Dad left you the den and the practice income while I got nothing but the headache of cleaning up the money. He thought our father had left me something and shorted him. He hadn't. The will split everything evenly. Grant had simply decided, somewhere along the way, that he was owed more. And a man who decides he's owed will always find a way to collect." I hung up. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I'd expected them to shake, and instead a kind of cold quiet had come over me, the same quiet I get at work when a subject lies to my face, and the lie clicks the last piece into place. There was no conversation that would fix this. There was only the file. My mother was harder. I drove to see her 2 days later, on what I hoped would be a clear morning, and it was, mostly. She knew me. She made me tea with hands that remembered the motions, even when the words came loose. We sat in her sunroom, and I tried, gently, so gently, to ask her what she understood about the money. "Grant takes care of all that," she said, and she smiled, and her whole face went soft and proud the way it always did with him. "He's so good to me, Nellie. He calls every Sunday. He sends flowers. He told me not to worry my head about the accounts, and I don't. He's such a good boy. He called every Sunday. He sent flowers." I sat there doing the arithmetic in my head that I wish I hadn't. 12 Sunday phone calls and a few bouquets against $90,000 of debt nailed to her house. And in my mother's mind, the flowers weighed more. He had spent a little warmth to cover a great theft, and it had worked perfectly. Because love that's failing remembers tenderness long after it forgets a balance sheet. "Mom," I said, "if I told you that some of the money Dad set aside for you for later isn't where it should be, what would you want me to do?" Her face clouded, the way it did when a sentence got too big. "Don't make trouble with your brother," she said, and her hand found mine. "Please, Nellie, you two are all I've got left. Whatever it is, just let it be. Family doesn't drag family through the mud over money. There it is. the sentence that runs in every one of these stories like a vein of poison through good rock. Family doesn't drag family over money. Let it be. I'd heard versions of it my whole life. When I was 16 and worked 2 jobs so the household could float, let it be. Now, with my mother's own future being the thing that had been stolen, the family's instinct was still the same. Protect the taker. Quiet the one who noticed. Make the person holding the receipts feel like the one breaking the family. I looked at my mother's hand in mine, the wedding ring loose on the finger now. And I understood that she could not be the one to decide this, because she no longer had all the information her own mind needed to decide anything. And because the part of her that could still feel had been carefully, deliberately filled with flowers by the man who'd robbed her. So I would have to decide. And I would have to be willing to be the villain in her story, to keep her out of the place that smells like bleach. That is the cost they never tell you about. Doing the right thing for someone sometimes means letting them believe, for a while, that you're the one who hurt them. Okay, Mom, I said. I hear you. Drink your tea. I meant it as love. I did not mean it as obedience. Now, page 9. When I'd first gone through Grant's folder, the one he'd mailed me to sign, I'd been so focused on the bank records that I'd nearly flipped past it. Stapled behind a statement, clearly by accident, was a single printed page that did not belong in an estate file. It was an email. My brother, in his rush to make everything look thorough, had printed a batch of documents straight from his computer and stapled the stack without reading it, the way busy, arrogant people do. And one page in that stack was a printout of an email thread between Grant and his wife. My sister-in-law is named Sloane. I'd always found her cool and a little hard to read, but I'd never thought her cruel. The email was from her to Grant, dated about 2 months before our father died. The subject line was simply the house. What it said, I have memorized, the way you memorize the things that rearrange you. Just move what's left out of the bridge before she gets the year-end statements. You know how Nell is. She reads everything twice. Once Walter's gone, there's no one to ask questions if we're already finished. Stop dragging your feet. It's not stealing if it's coming to us anyway. Stop dragging your feet. You know how Nell is. They knew. They had not stumbled into this in a moment of desperation. They had planned it around me, around the specific, inconvenient fact of what I do for a living, racing to empty my mother's bridge before the one person in the family who'd notice could get her hands on a year-end statement. I was not an obstacle they'd failed to consider. I was the whole reason for the hurry. It's not stealing if it's coming to us anyway. I put that page in a plastic sleeve. My hand was steady when I did it. I drove it to Dana's, and she read it twice, of course she did, and then she looked up at me and said quietly, Nell, this isn't just exploitation anymore. 2 people planning it together, in writing, before the fact. That's conspiracy. He handed you the one thing his lawyer would have paid anything to keep out of your hands. My brother's arrogance built my case. He was so certain I was just the sister who was good with the books that he mailed me the proof, stapled to page 9, and never imagined I'd read past page 2. So I built the folder, not a metaphor, a real one. Beige with tabs, the way my father kept the green ledger, the way I keep every file at work. I sat at his desk under the window where the bird feeder still hung, and I built the cleanest file of my career, because it was the most important one I would ever make. Tab 1, the bridge account, 18 months of statements, 312,000 on the first page, and 26 on the last. every withdrawal flagged. Tab 2. The 41 checks to G. Hartley Consulting. With the Delaware registration showing the company was born the same month my father's signature died. Tab 3. The personal care agreement. Beside it, the hospital chart proving the date was a month after Dad could no longer hold a pen, and a page of my father's real signatures over the years, so anyone could watch the tremor and then look at the steady forgery and know. Tab 4. The home equity line, the forged application, the notary's name beside the photograph of him golfing with my brother. Tab 5. The cash, every withdrawal between $9,200 and $9,800, charted in a single line that climbed and made the word structuring unnecessary because the picture said it without me. Tab 6. The email, page 9. Sloane's words in a plastic sleeve. Tab 7. A sworn statement from Dana, certified fraud examiner, independently confirming every figure. And tab 8 last, a letter from Howard Pell on his letterhead, explaining in flat lawyer's prose what each of the preceding tabs would be called in a court of the state of Ohio. Every claim backed by a document, every document backed by a number, every number pointing at the same man, and now the same woman beside him. Dana came up one more time to review it before I did what I was going to do. She turned the pages slowly, and at the end she said, "You could just hand this to the prosecutor and never say a word to the family. Let the system do it. You don't owe them a performance." "He's telling everyone I'm the problem," I said. "He's telling Mom I'm cold. He's telling Aunt Carol I'm tearing the family apart over an inheritance. If I let the prosecutor do it quietly, his version becomes the family's memory of all this forever. They'll say I had my own brother arrested in secret like a coward. I won't get to be the one who's lying. I have to put the truth on the table in front of all of them, once in the open, where his charm can't reach it." Dana nodded slowly. "Then make it clean, no shouting. No accusation that isn't already proven on the page in front of them. You lay down paper, not anger." "I learned that from my father," I said. "He used to say numbers don't care how loud you are." I closed the folder and set it by the door. 3 weeks until the dinner. Grant had already scheduled it. He thought it was the night he'd finally get my signature. Before the dinner, one more thing happened that I need you to know, because it's the reason I didn't lose my nerve. I went to visit my mother on a Thursday, and it was a bad morning. She didn't know me at first. She was frightened, sitting in her own sunroom afraid of the woman who'd come in, until I started humming one of the songs, the one she'd sung to my father at the end. And something in her face loosened, and she said, "Nellie," and started to cry, not because she was sad, but because for one moment the fog lifted and she knew me. And she knew she'd been lost a second before. "I don't want to go somewhere bad," she said, out of nowhere, gripping my hand. "Promise me I don't have to go somewhere bad." She didn't know, in any organized way, what had been done to her money. But somewhere underneath the disease, the fear of the bleach-smelling place was alive in her, the way the songs were alive, in the part of person that forgets last. My father built a bridge so she'd never feel that fear. My brother sold the bridge for parts. "You don't have to go anywhere bad," I told her. "I promise you, I'm handling it." And this time, I meant the promise exactly the way I'd refused to mean it to Grant. I would handle it. I just wasn't going to do it the way anyone in that family expected. If you've ever made a promise like that to someone who couldn't protect themselves, type the word receipts in the comments, because keeping that kind of promise is the whole reason people like me exist. Subscribe and stay with me. The dinner is next, and it did not go the way my brother planned. The dinner was at my mother's house, the house with the forged debt on it, on a Sunday evening in the early fall. Grant had organized it and called it a family meeting to finalize Dad's estate and move forward for Mom. The whole family came. My mother, dressed up and having a fairly good day. Grant and Sloane. Our father's sister, Aunt Carol, sharp as a tack at 73. A couple of cousins, Dean and Marie. Howard Pell was not there, but he knew what I was doing, and so did one other person who had not yet arrived. Grant ran the evening like a man chairing a board he already controlled. He'd brought a leather portfolio, and after the plates were cleared, he opened it on the dining table where we'd eaten Thanksgiving every year of my life, and he slid a small stack of papers toward me with a pen laid neatly on top, the cap already off. "So," he said, warm, expansive, a hand on Mom's shoulder. "I know this year's been brutal. Dad would not want us sitting in grief and red tape. I've gotten everything in order. The final accounting's all here. Howard's reviewed the structure. And once Nell and I both sign, we can release Mom's funds into the new arrangement and actually breathe again. Nellie, I had it all tabbed for you. Just sign where the stickers are, and we put this behind us. For Mom," he said, for Mom, and squeezed our mother's shoulder, and she beamed up at him, her good boy, and several people at the table smiled, because it was a beautiful piece of theater, and my brother was very, very good. I looked at the pen. I looked at my mother's face. And then Aunt Carol, God bless her, who had never in her life been able to leave a silence alone, turned to me and said, "Eleanor, honey, you've been so quiet through all of this. Grant's carried such a load with the money. The least you can do is sign so your mother can rest easy." It was the opening. He had handed me a pen. She had handed me the floor. I did not reach for the pen. I reached down to the chair beside me, and I lifted the beige folder onto the table, and I stood up. Not dramatically. The way you stand when you have something true to say and you want it heard clearly. "Before I sign anything," I said, "I want to show all of you what I found when I did what I do for a living, and read it twice." The table went still in that particular way. A table goes still when everyone senses the floor shift, but no one knows yet which way it'll fall. "Nell," Grant said, the warmth holding but his eyes changing. "This isn't the time." "It's exactly the time," I said. "You called it a meeting to finalize the estate, so let's finalize it with the actual numbers." I opened to tab 1, and I laid the first page on the table, turned so the family could read it, and I slid it to the center. "This is the account our father built to pay for Mom's care." He called it the bridge. On the day he explained it to me, it held $312,000. He priced it himself, so Mom would always have a good place to live. I laid down the last statement beside it. As of last month, it holds $26,000. That's enough for about 3 months of her care. After that, the only option is a county facility and a Medicaid waiting list. A small sound went around the table. My mother said, "That can't be right," but she said it lightly, the way she said most things now, not quite landing on what it meant. I laid down tab 2. Over the last 19 months, 41 checks were written out of our parents' accounts to a company called Heartless Consulting. $96,000. The company was registered in Delaware the same month Dad's stroke took away his ability to sign his own name. "That's a legitimate management arrangement," Grant said, louder now, to the table rather than to me. "Dad and I set that up years ago." She wasn't part of those conversations. I laid down tab 3, the care agreement, and beside it the hospital chart, and beside that the page of my father's real signatures. This is the agreement that supposedly authorized those payments. It pays Grant $4,500 a month to, and I'm quoting it, coordinate and supervise all aspects of caregiving. I let that sit for one breath, because everyone at that table knew who'd actually coordinated the caregiving, who'd lived in the den, who'd buttoned the shirts. It's signed in Dad's name. It's dated 1 month after the stroke that ended his ability to sign anything. That's documented in this hospital chart. And here are 40 years of Dad's real signatures. You can all see the tremor. Now look at the one on this agreement. It's perfectly steady, and it has a middle initial. Our father never signed his middle initial once in his life. Aunt Carol leaned in and looked, really looked, the way you look at 2 photographs to find what's different, and I watched the color leave her face as she found it. That signature is forged, I said quietly. I'd testify to it. I have testified to less obvious ones. Grant stood up. This is insane, he said, and he turned to the table with his hands open, the gesture I'd watched him use my whole life to make a room agree with him. She does this for a living, everyone. She finds fraud where there isn't any because that's how she gets paid. She's grieving, and she's turned it on her own family. Dad would be ashamed. It was a good move. 2 months ago it might have worked. But I had already laid paper on the table, and paper does not flinch when a charming man raises his voice. I laid down tab 4. 11 months ago, a home equity line of credit was opened against this house. The house Mom and Dad paid off in 1996. $90,000 was drawn against it. Here is the application. The signatures are Mom's and Dad's, and they're both forged, and here is the notary who stamped it. I set down the printout beside the photograph, and here is a picture Grant posted of himself golfing with that same notary. I heard Sloan beside Grant take a breath. Mom, I said, gentle now, because this was the part that would hurt her. You owe $90,000 on this house. You never knew because you never signed it. Someone signed it for you. My mother's face did something I will never forget. For just a moment, the fog lifted, the way it had in the sunroom, and the businesswoman who'd kept a household balanced on a hardware store income looked out through her own confusion and understood exactly what a forged note against a paid-off house meant. My house, she said. We paid off the house, Walter and me. We had a little party. She looked at Grant. Who did this to our house? Mom, don't listen to her, Grant said, and his voice cracked, not with grief now, but with the first real fear I'd ever heard in it. She's twisting everything. I laid down tab 5, the chart of the cash, the line climbing toward 10,000 again and again, and never crossing it. $60,000 in cash, withdrawn in amounts just under 10,000 over and over. 10,000 is the number that triggers a federal report. Staying under it on purpose has a name. It's called structuring, and it's a crime by itself, separate from everything else. I looked at my brother. You don't structure withdrawals when you're borrowing from family in a pinch, Grant. You structure them when you know what you're doing is a crime and you're trying not to be seen. The cousins were staring at him now. Dean had pushed back from the table. Aunt Carol had her hand over her mouth, and Grant did the thing they always do at the end when the charm stops working and there's nothing left underneath it. He got loud, and he got cruel, and he showed everyone the face I'd heard on the phone. You self-righteous, he started, and caught himself and turned to the table. She's always been like this. The martyr. Poor Nellie gave up her big career to play nurse. And now she wants a medal, and she wants to control the money because she thinks she earned it. You all bend over backward for St. Aliner, while the rest of us live in the real world where money is complicated. He jabbed a finger at the folder. This is a hit job. She built this to cut me out. I built this, I said, to keep our mother out of a county home. That's all this folder does. It puts her care back where Dad put it. That's when I laid down tab 6. I'd promised myself I'd be clean, and I was. I didn't say a word. I just took the plastic sleeve out and set it in the center of the table, turned so they could all read it, and I let my brother and his wife watch the family read it in real time. This is an email, I said, after a moment, stapled by accident into the folder of documents Grant himself mailed me to sign. It's from Sloan to Grant. It's dated 2 months before Dad died. I read it out loud because some of them couldn't see it well, and because some things have to be said in a human voice to become real. Just move what's left out of the bridge before she gets the year-end statements. You know how Nell is. She reads everything twice. Once Walter's gone, there's no one to ask questions if we're already finished. It's not stealing if it's coming to us anyway. You could have heard a clock tick. I don't think anyone breathed. Sloane's face had gone the gray-white of someone who's just watched a door close that they thought was a window. That's out of context, she whispered, and even she could hear how small it sounded. There's no context that fixes it's not stealing, Aunt Carol said in a voice like a dropped stone. She turned to Grant, and 73 years of being his aunt was in her face, and so was the end of it. You planned this. The two of you planned to rob your mother, and you timed it around your sister so she wouldn't catch you, while your father was dying in the next county, while Aliner was wiping his chin. Grant had no answer. For the first time in his life, in front of a room, my brother had no answer, so he reached for the last tool in the box, the one men like him always reach for when logic and charm have both failed. He went for the threat. He leaned across the table toward me, low, just for me, but the table was silent enough that everyone heard it. You have no idea what you've just done to this family, he said. You're going to regret this for the rest of your life. I will make sure of it. I reached into my pocket and set my phone on the table, screen up, the recorder running as it had been since before dinner. I'd like everyone to note what my brother just said, I said. It's recording. It's been recording. Numbers and tape, Grant. 2 things that don't care how you smile, Dean said quietly. That was a threat, Grant. We all heard it. And then there were 3 knocks on the front door. My mother, on instinct, half rose to answer it, but Aunt Carol put a hand on her arm and I said, I'll get it, Mom, because I knew who it was. I'd filed the report 2 weeks before, with Howard Pell beside me, at the Financial Crimes Unit of the County Sheriff's Office. The detective's name was Marcus Reyes, and he told me how these things usually go, that exploitation cases are slow, that they build quietly, that an arrest at a family dinner is not how it's typically done. But when I'd explained that the entire family had been told I was the liar, and that my brother was even now arranging for everyone to sign documents that would bury the theft and move my mother's remaining money beyond reach, he'd gone quiet. And then he'd said, if he's actively trying to get the estate signed off this weekend, that changes my timeline. Tell me when and where. I opened the door, and Detective Reyes was standing on my mother's porch in a sport coat with his badge on his belt, and a uniformed deputy a step behind him. He took off no hat because he wasn't wearing one, but he had that same unhurried steadiness my father used to have, the steadiness of a man who has delivered hard news before and knows the kindest thing he can do is not rush it. MS. Hartley, he said to me, gently. Is your brother here? I led him through my mother's house, past the photographs on the wall, Grant in his football uniform, Grant at his wedding, the two of us as kids on the steps of the hardware store, and out to the dining room where the family sat frozen around a table, covered in the evidence of what one of them had done. Grant Hartley, Detective Reyes said. My brother stood very slowly. I have a warrant for your arrest. The charges are forgery and financial exploitation of an elderly and disabled adult in connection with funds taken from the accounts of Walter and Frances Hartley. He said it the way Dad would have, evenly, without relish. You'll want to come with us quietly. There's no need to make this worse in front of your mother. The room made no sound at all. Somewhere outside, a bird was at the feeder my father hung. Grant looked at me across the table, across the folder, across 44 years. You actually called the police, he said, on family. And I gave him the answer I'd been carrying since the den, since the stool, since I was 9 years old learning to add a column 3 times. You took our mother's bridge, Grant. You forged Dad's name a month after his hand stopped working. You put a lien on the house they spent their whole lives paying off, and you planned it in writing so I wouldn't catch you in time. My voice did not shake. Mom always said family doesn't drag family through the mud over money. And she's right. Family doesn't. But the state of Ohio does. And you stopped being something I could protect the day you decided she was worth less to you than your own debts. Detective Reyes stepped forward. The deputy took my brother's wrists. The cuffs are quieter than the movies make them sound. Just a small mechanical click, almost polite. And then my brother was a man with his hands behind his back in our mother's dining room. Sloane was crying. Reyes told her, not unkindly, that investigators would be in touch with her as well. And the way her face fell told me she understood that page 9 had her name on it too. My mother watched her son walk toward the front door in handcuffs, and on one of her clear, terrible, perfectly timed moments, she understood all of it at once. She didn't scream. She just said, very softly, in the voice she'd used to sing to my father, "Oh, Grant. Oh, my boy. What did you do?" And then she turned to me, and I braced for her to call me cruel, to tell me I'd broken her family, to take his side the way she always had. Instead, she reached out and took my hand, the way she had in the sunroom, and she said, "You kept your promise. You said I wouldn't have to go somewhere bad. You're keeping your father's bridge." Her eyes were wet, and for that one moment, completely clear. "Walter would be so proud of you, Nellie. You added it 3 times, didn't you?" 3 times, Mom, I said. And that was when I finally cried. Let me tell you how it landed, because these stories owe you the after, not just the moment. Grant's lawyer did what good lawyers do and negotiated. The forgery and exploitation charges were strong. Detective Reyes told me later that it was the rare case where the victim's family had handed him a finished file. And rather than risk a felony trial with a forged document and a written conspiracy in evidence, my brother pleaded. He pleaded guilty to financial exploitation and to forgery. He received a felony record that will follow him the rest of his life, 2 years of incarceration with the possibility of less, a long stretch of probation after, and most importantly to me, court-ordered restitution of the full amount, enforced through garnishment and the seizure of assets. The leased SUV surrendered. The boat I hadn't even known about sold. The home equity line, because it had been opened with a forged signature, was challenged and voided. The bank, faced with the forgery evidence and the notary's involvement, unwound it rather than fight. My parents' house went back to being what it had been for 30 years, paid off, free and clear, my mother's. Sloane was charged separately. Her own emailed words made certain of that. She entered her own plea to a lesser count. I take no joy in it. She is the mother of a niece and nephew I love. And what comes next for those children is its own kind of grief that no folder of mine could fix. And the bridge, with restitution flowing and the HELOC erased and the recovered assets applied, my mother's care is funded again. She is in the good place, the one that doesn't smell like giving up, with a window that looks out on a garden. And on her clear mornings, she tells the staff about the hardware store and the little party she and Walter threw the day they paid off the house. My father priced that bridge so she would never be afraid. She crosses it now. He built it, and I just kept anyone from selling it for scrap. There's an aftermath inside the family, too, the slow kind. Aunt Carol calls me every Sunday now, the way Grant used to call Mom, except she actually shows up. The cousins, Dean and Marie, sat with me a long time after the dinner and said the thing people say, that they'd had a feeling about Grant for years and were ashamed they'd let his charm talk them out of it every time. That's how men like my brother survive as long as they do. Not because no one suspects, because everyone suspects a little, and everyone decides, a little, that it's easier to be charmed. My brother wrote me one letter from where he is. It was 4 pages, and the first 3 were an explanation. The failed real estate fund, the investors he'd had to repay before they ruined him, the hole he'd been filling with our parents' money because he was sure, he was so sure, he'd make it back before anyone noticed. He wanted me to understand that he never meant for it to be theft. He'd been borrowing from the future, he wrote, and the future just didn't come. The 4th page asked me to talk to the prosecutor, to soften the restitution, to tell them it had been a misunderstanding between family. I wrote him back one line. I thought about it for a long time, and in the end, I wrote what our father would have written, because it was the truest thing I knew. A clean ledger is an honest one. Get yours clean, Grant, and then we'll talk. I haven't heard back. I don't know if I will. I've made my peace with not knowing, because I've learned the difference between a door you lock out of cruelty and a door you simply stop holding open with your own bleeding hands. I had the green ledger from the store framed. Dad's last one, the final year of Hartley hardware, his handwriting in it, the columns added 3 times in faded pencil in the margins where he'd checked himself. It hangs in the den now, over the desk where he told me about the bridge, where I built the folder that saved it. People ask me sometimes, the ones who hear this story, whether I regret it, whether it was worth a brother, whether I think about the version of that dinner where I just picked up the pen and signed and kept my family whole and let it be. I do think about it. And then I think about my mother in the sunroom, gripping my hand, asking me to promise she wouldn't have to go somewhere bad. I think about the fact that she could no longer count her own money, and the one person she trusted to count it for her had decided she was worth less than his debts. The people who say family doesn't keep score have almost always never been the ones quietly paying it. I used to believe that being the good one, the steady one, the one who was handy with the books, meant absorbing whatever the family handed me and never making trouble. I don't believe that anymore. Being the steady one means knowing the difference between a hand that's reaching out to be held and a hand that's reaching into the drawer. And it means having the nerve, when you finally see which one it is, to close the drawer. My father gave me one real inheritance, and it wasn't money. It was a stool and a column of numbers, and the stubborn old belief that the truth is sitting right there in the figures for anyone brave enough to add them up honestly, 3 times, top to bottom, bottom to top, and a third way to catch yourself. I added them up. I'm not sorry, and my mother sleeps in a good place tonight because I did. That's my story. One folder, one forged signature, and the long way I learned that loving someone has never once required me to hand them the pen and look away while they sign my mother's future over to themselves. If this story reminded you that protecting the people who can't protect themselves is never, ever selfish, no matter what the takers call you, then do me a favor. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Type steady hands in the comments so I know it reached you. Subscribe because there are more of these, and I'll see you in the next one. Keep your ledger clean.